Have you ever clicked buy or maybe sell on a stock and then just,
Right.
well, you just moved on with your day, right? You see the price change, maybe check your portfolio later. But have you actually wondered what really happens, in that complex sort of hidden world after your order goes through? It's like this essential machinery that makes the whole financial system work, but it's mostly invisible. So today, that's what we're doing. We're taking a deep dive into those critical mechanics. We'll be exploring settlement, corporate actions, and beneficial ownership. Our mission really is to pull back the curtain on these pretty fascinating processes, the ones that make sure trades actually get completed, how companies adjust things like shares, and maybe most importantly, who really owns what when you make that trade.
And, understanding this stuff isn't just about learning jargon. It's really fundamental. It connects directly to the security and the efficiency of the markets. Even your rights as someone who invests. This is genuinely the backbone of how your investments function. It builds the trust and stability we all kind of depend on.
That's a great way to put it. The backbone. So, our goal for you today is to unpack these, let's say, complex concepts, drawing from the source material we've looked at. We want to give you a shortcut to being well informed, maybe with some surprising facts, practical insights, hopefully without feeling too overwhelmed. Okay, let's unpack this.
Right. So when you place a trade, maybe on your phone app or something, that's really just the start. Once your order is executed, meaning a trade, they call it a fill, happens on an exchange, say the NYSE or NASDAQ, the two firms involved, the buyer's firm and the seller's firm, they first have to agree on all the details, every single one. And this agreement part, this critical step, that's what's called clearing, or sometimes affirming the trade.
Okay, so it's like a mandatory digital handshake before anything actually changes hands, a sort of pre-check.
Uh,
And once that's done, then we get to settlement. That's the actual swap securities for money, completing the deal between the firms. The material we went through mentioned this is often handled by a third party, like the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, the DTCC.
Precisely. Yeah, the DTCC. Think of it as more than just a clearinghouse. It's kind of the quiet giant in the background. It's the single entity that guarantees trillions, literally trillions, in trades every day. It stops problems from cascading through the whole system. It's a level of systemic trust most people just assume is there, but it's absolutely vital. And after settlement, you've got the ongoing part, custody and safekeeping, which is basically just looking after the assets, client assets, firm assets, continuous, super important, keeping your investment safe.
Right, keeping them safe. And speaking of completing things, it's important to get that this isn't instant, is it? There's a specific timing, a rhythm to how quickly these trades officially settle.
Yes, exactly. For most types of securities, we're talking about regular way settlement. So for your typical corporate stocks, bonds, municipal securities too, that's 2 business days after the trade date. We call that T+2.
T+2.
Yeah. So if you buy on a Monday, it settles Wednesday. Simple as that. But interestingly, for U.S. Treasury securities and options, it's even faster. That's 1 business day after the trade date, or T+1.
T+1 for those. Okay, that's the standard way. But what if things aren't standard? Can you, change that timing?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, you can. That's where something called special settlement comes into play. The sources we looked at point out you can actually modify the settlement timing, but only if both parties agree before the trade even happens. It has to be upfront. For example, maybe a seller needs the money like right now, today. They might agree on cash settlement. That means the whole thing completes on the very same day as the trade.
Same day.
Okay.
Okay? Or the opposite situation. What if the seller needs more time? Maybe there's a legal thing, like removing a restriction legend from a physical stock certificate. Could they ask for, seller's option settlement?
That's it. Seller's option. It gives them extra time beyond the usual T+2, but again, it has to be negotiated beforehand. And then there's also when issued settlement. This is for securities that have been authorized but aren't actually out there yet, like brand new stock issues or maybe shares from a company spinoff. Those just settle whenever the security actually becomes available to trade.
Okay, let me try and recap those speeds quickly. Corporate and muni bonds, T+2. U.S. Gov securities and options, T+1. Cash trades are T, same day. Seller's option gives you more time, if agreed. And when issued is, well, when they're issued. Makes sense. But here's something important you mentioned we shouldn't confuse. Customer payment timing versus the firm-to-firm settlement timing. They're different, right?
That's a really crucial distinction, yeah. For you as the customer, your deadline to pay for what you bought is usually governed by Regulation T from the Fed. And that's typically no later than 2 business days after the regular way settlement date, sometimes called S+2.
S+2. Got it.
But the trade settlement itself, the actual exchange of cash and securities between the Brokerage firms, that's governed by FINRA rules, their uniform practice code. There are definitely distinct timelines.
So how does the settlement actually, happen? Practically speaking, today it's mostly electronic, isn't it? Through the DTCC.
Overwhelmingly so.
Yes.
Electronic settlement via the DTCC is the standard. It's essentially a massive digital ledger system, a book entry system. The DTCC just updates the positions, who owns what security, who has what cash on its internal books. And this provides an incredible guarantee. It virtually eliminates the risk that the other side of your trade won't deliver. It really is a marvel of efficiency.
Not Marvel, yeah.
Definitely. For nearly all actively traded securities, what they call depository eligible securities, ownership just transfers through these bookkeeping entries. No physical certificates changing hands. Even the cash moves this way. However, it's quite interesting that there are still cases of physical securities delivery. It does still happen, especially if, say, a client insists on holding actual paper certificates, or maybe if a particular security isn't eligible for the DTCC's electronic system.
And when physical certificates are involved, they have to be in a good delivery form. Is that the term?
That's the one. Good delivery. It means everything has to be perfect, correct certificate, all necessary signatures, endorsements, everything in order. The material also highlighted CUSIP numbers. Think of these like unique barcodes for every single security issue. They make sure the right security is being delivered. It's an identifier.
Like a serial number for stocks and bonds.
Exactly. And for physical stock certificates, you actually have to sign the back. Or for security, send a separate signed document called a stock power while the certificate itself is mailed.
So, right, you can't just show up with a crumpled share certificate in your pocket then. Needs to be formal.
Precisely.
Yeah.
No crumpled bags.
Yeah.
And for physical shares between brokers, there are even very specific units of delivery, often standardized blocks, like multiples of 100 shares for stock. It's all about preventing errors and fraud, ensuring complete clarity.
It's kind of fascinating, isn't it? This paradox. We have this incredibly fast digital financial world, but some of these really precise, almost old-fashioned physical rules still exist alongside it. And speaking of specific rules, you mentioned things like restricted securities, shares that have some kind of restriction printed on them. They aren't good delivery.
Correct. They have restrictive legend. They're not considered good delivery until that legend is removed. And that usually requires going through a transfer agent, often following specific SEC rules like Rule 144, and you generally need the okay from the company that issued the stock. It can be quite involved.
Okay, so let's assume the trade is settled. Electronically or physically, the shares are now sitting in your account. Is that the end of the story?
Not necessarily, because the companies themselves can initiate actions that significantly change your investment after settlement. These are what we broadly call corporate actions. Events started by the company that impact your holdings. We're talking about things like stock splits, proxy notices for voting, tender offers, mergers, acquisitions, spin-offs, a whole range of things.
Stock splits are probably the most familiar example, right? A forward stock split, maybe a 2-for-1, usually done to make the share price lower, maybe seem more accessible or marketable. So if you had, say, 1,000 shares trading at $100 each, a 2-for-1 split just means you now have 2,000 shares, but the price gets cut in half to $50. The key thing is your total investment value stays the same, right? Like swapping a $100 bill for two $50.
Exactly. Your total value is unchanged. And the opposite is reverse stock split, maybe a 1-for-5 split. Companies might do this if their stock price is really low, perhaps fallen below exchange listing requirements, like under $5 a share. They want to boost the per share price. So if you had 10,000 shares at $1, after a 1-for-5 reverse split, you'd end up with 2,000 shares, but now they're worth $5 each. Again, same total value. And here's a neat point from the material. Unlike getting a cash dividend, a stock split or even a stock dividend usually isn't a taxable event when it happens.
Interesting.
Yeah, the IRS generally treats it as just adjusting your cost basis per share. You just have more or fewer pieces of the same pie. It's a built-in tax efficiency in a way.
Okay, that makes sense. Then you mentioned tender offers. What's that about? Sounds like someone making a public bid for shares.
That's right. It's when a person or a company makes a public offer to buy a specific stock, usually at a price above the current market price. Often the goal is to gain control or influence, like getting seats on the board. If it's only for a portion of the shares, a partial tender, you won't know exactly how many of your shares they'll accept until all the offers are in and tallied up. Our sources mentioned you can participate if you actually own the stock outright, or if you have an unconditional contract to buy it, or, interestingly, if you've exercised a call option for that stock.
Right, you have to exercise the call option.
Yes, that's key. Because the call option itself isn't issued by the company, you need the actual shares or the right to them. Also, your broker's corporate actions department handles all the instructions from clients for things like rights offerings or warrants, which often can be traded themselves, sold, or exercised.
And then there are the big ones like mergers and acquisitions, M&A, companies combining or one buying another, like Amazon buying Whole Foods. That was huge. And spin-offs, where a company separates out a part of its business and gives shares in the new entity to its existing shareholders, like when eBay spun off PayPal years ago.
Exactly. All major events that directly affect shareholders.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly to something that really impacts how you, the listener, interact with the companies you invest in. Let's talk about beneficial ownership and how companies communicate with shareholders. Many of us, probably most of us, hold our securities in what's called street name, which means the shares aren't registered directly in your name, but in the name of your broker-dealer. When that's the case, you are the beneficial owner. You have all the economic rights, but the broker is the owner of record.
That's right. The broker holds them for the benefit of you, the customer. It makes transferring shares much easier and faster. Now, if the broker-dealer gets official communications from the company, think proxy voting materials, annual reports, that sort of thing, they have a legal obligation to pass that information along to you, the beneficial owner. And this brings up a really important distinction. Whether you are classified as a non-objecting beneficial owner, NOBO, or an objecting beneficial owner, OBO.
Right, NOBO versus OBO. This is where it gets quite direct for you as an investor. If you're an OBO, it basically means you've said okay to your broker sharing your name and address with the companies you invest in. So the company can then send shareholder communications directly to you, things like proxy forms so you can vote. And those important financial filings, the big annual 10K report, the quarterly 10Q updates, they come straight to your mailbox or inbox.
Exactly. But conversely, if you're an OBO, you've specifically told your broker not to share your personal information with the issuer. You object. In that case, the company sends all the communications in bulk to the broker-dealer, and then the broker is responsible for forwarding that material onto you. It gives you a layer of anonymity from the company itself.
Well, it means the info comes indirectly, right, through an intermediary.
Yes, there's that extra step.
The material we reviewed also made a point about costs. It seems broker-dealers can charge the companies, the issuers, for the expense of forwarding these materials.
Yes.
But they generally are not allowed to charge you, the customer, for sending you things like proxies or essential financial reports.
That's correct. They can't charge the customer for those specific items. They can, however, charge reasonable fees for other services, like maybe safekeeping your securities or collecting dividends on your behalf, if that's part of your agreement.
Right. Reasonable fees for other services.
So thinking back, we've really covered a huge amount of ground today, haven't we? From that initial split-second agreement of clearing through the whole multi-day settlement process, T+2, T+1, and then looking at how those corporate actions can really reshape your holdings after the fact. I think understanding these back-end processes, even just the basics, really does empower you as an individual investor. It gives you a much deeper sense of how your money actually moves and what influences your investments.
I completely agree. It's pretty incredible when you think about these intricate systems, whether it's the super efficient electronic book entry stuff at the DTCC, or even those surprisingly persistent rules around physical certificates and good delivery, all working constantly behind the scenes to maintain trust and stability in the market. So yeah, what does this all mean for you listening right now?
Well, here's something to think about. Consider that structure of beneficial ownership we just discussed. No BO versus OBO. How does your choice, whether you object or don't object to sharing your info, directly shape the kind of transparency and the directness of your relationship with the companies you invest in? What level of anonymity do you prefer versus direct communication? And how might that preference actually influence your decisions, not just about communication, but maybe even brand or financial choices?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it leads to maybe a bigger question, too. How do we as a financial system continue to balance the amazing efficiency we get from technology like book entry settlement with the fundamental legal and sometimes even physical requirements that still underpin everything? You know, think about that constant tension between wanting things faster, cheaper, more streamlined, and the absolute need for security, accountability, and, well, making sure everything is legally sound, even if it means keeping some older processes in place.
It's a fascinating balancing act. So